Before we dive into one of the most bizarre tactical improvisations of the Western Front, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because stories like this one, buried in field reports and soldier memoirs, deserve to reach everyone who loves real history told raw. You won't believe what desperation and a cook's crazy hunch can accomplish when steel and mud collide. Now let's go back to November 1944, where half-tracks are about to outrun German armor, using a fuel mix nobody should have tried. The half-track lurches through another meter of mud, its tracks chewing at the slick brown paste that swallows the road. Rain hammers the canvas top, turning the inside into a drum of water and exhaust fumes. Private Jensen grips the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes locked on the tree line ahead. Behind him in the cargo bed, Corporal Hayes and 3 riflemen brace against the side rails, rifles pointed at nothing and everything. They can hear the German engine now, a low, grinding roar somewhere in the murk behind them. It sounds closer. Hayes yells over the noise, asking Jensen if he can get more speed. Jensen shouts back that he is already redlining the throttle. The M3 half-track, 2.5 tons of steel and rubber, powered by a white 160AX inline-6 gasoline engine, rated for about 90 horsepower, is not built for racing. It is built for hauling infantry and supplies across open ground, not for outrunning panzers in a flooded forest road, but here they are trying to do exactly that. The date is November 18th, 1944. The location is a supply route east of Hürtgen Forest, a name that will become synonymous with mud, blood, and tactical nightmares. This sector, part of the 9th Army's push toward the Ruhr River, has turned into a quagmire. 2 weeks of rain have dissolved the roads, filled the ditches, and turned every low field into a swamp. The half-tracks, issued to mechanized infantry and reconnaissance units, are supposed to give mobility where wheeled vehicles fail. Their front wheels steer, their rear tracks grip, and in theory, they can cross terrain that stops a deuce-and-a-half truck cold. In theory. In practice, the mud here is different. It is not just wet dirt. It is a slick, adhesive clay that builds up on tracks and tires, clogs sprockets, and sucks vehicles down until their bellies drag. The German forces, falling back toward the Ruhr, have left mines and ambush points along every possible route. Their armor, Panzer IVs, and the occasional Tiger can punch through American positions if they catch infantry in the open, but the Panzers have the same problem with mud. Their wider tracks give them better flotation, but their weight, 30 tons for a Mark IV and 56 for a Tiger, means they sink deep when they stop. Mobility becomes the deciding factor. Whoever can keep moving has the advantage. The half-track Jensen is driving belongs to a reconnaissance platoon attached to an infantry regiment. Its mission today is simple on paper. Run supplies to a forward outpost, pick up wounded, and return before dark. But the Germans have other ideas. A small armored patrol, 2 Panzerkaufers and a half-dozen Panzer Grenadiers in a Hanomag, spotted the American column an hour ago and decided to probe. One of the Panzers got stuck trying to flank through a field. The other is now pursuing Jensen's half-track along the only road that stays above water. The race is on. Jensen can hear the Panzer's engine note change as it negotiates a curve. He guesses it is maybe 400 meters back, close enough to get a shot if the trees open up. The half-track's top speed on pavement is about 45 miles per hour. In this mud, Jensen is lucky to hold 20. The Panzer, even in mud, can match that if it does not bog down. The question is whether the half-track can maintain traction long enough to reach a clearing where American artillery can intervene, or a fork in the road where the Panzer has to guess which way they went. Right now, it is just mud and math. Back at the motor pool 3 hours earlier, the situation looked different. The half-tracks had been idling in a muddy clearing, waiting for orders. Mechanics moved between vehicles, checking oil levels, tightening track tension, cursing the weather. Sergeant Miller, the platoon's senior mechanic, stood beside one of the M3s with his arms crossed, staring at the engine compartment like it had personally offended him. The white 160AX was a reliable engine, a straight 6 that produced decent torque for its size, but it had quirks. It ran hot under load. It liked clean fuel. It did not forgive abuse. And right now, every vehicle in the platoon was struggling. The problem was not mechanical failure. The problem was power. In normal conditions, the half-track had enough grunt to climb moderate grades and push through soft ground. But this mud was not normal. The clay stuck to everything. The front wheels, which provided steering but also some forward drive, spun uselessly. The rear tracks gripped, but the resistance was enormous. The engine labored, the transmission whined, and forward progress slowed to a crawl. Some vehicles were getting stuck, others were overheating. The unit needed an edge. That is when Private Leo Kowalski, a cook assigned to the company mess, walked over to Miller with an idea that sounded insane. Kowalski was from Detroit, the son of a machinist who worked in an engine plant before the war. Leo had grown up around motors, listening to his father talk about compression ratios and octane numbers at the dinner table. He had no formal training as a mechanic, but he knew engines the way some people know card games. He had been watching the half-track struggle all morning, and he thought he saw the problem. The gasoline they were using, standard military-issue fuel, was fine for most conditions, but in this cold, wet environment, with engines running rich to compensate for poor combustion, the fuel was not delivering enough punch. The engines were not getting the explosion they needed to overcome the mud's resistance. Kowalski told Miller he thought they could improve performance by tweaking the fuel. Miller looked at him like he had suggested setting the vehicles on fire, which was not far from what Kowalski was proposing. Kowalski explained his logic. Gasoline burns at a certain rate. Add a small amount of higher octane or faster burning additive, and you can increase the energy release during combustion, giving more power per stroke. The problem was that they did not have aviation fuel or racing gas sitting around. What they did have, Kowalski pointed out, was denatured alcohol in the medical supply tent, kerosene for field lamps, and waste oil from engine changes. He proposed mixing a small amount of alcohol into the fuel to boost octane slightly and speed up combustion. The kerosene, a trace amount, could help with cold start issues and lubrication. The oil, used sparingly on gaskets and moving parts, would reduce friction where it mattered. Miller listened, frowning. He knew that adding alcohol to gasoline was not unheard of. Some racing engines used it. Farm equipment sometimes ran on alcohol blends, but this was different. They were talking about field improvisation with no precise measurements, no testing, and no margin for error. If the mix was too lean, the engine could detonate, knocking pistons and destroying bearings. If it was too rich, the engine would foul plugs, carbon up valves, and lose power. If the alcohol percentage was too high, it could corrode fuel lines and gaskets. And if anything ignited in the wrong place, the whole vehicle could go up in flames. Kowalski admitted the risks, but he argued that the alternative was worse. Sitting still in this mud meant being targets. Running the engines at full throttle on straight gasoline meant overheating and breakdowns. If they could get even a 10% boost in torque, it might be enough to keep them moving. Miller did not like it. He told Kowalski that messing with fuel was a court-martial offense. Kowalski shrugged and said they could call it a field expedient. Miller stared at him, then at the half-tracks, then back at him. He asked how much alcohol Kowalski wanted to use. Kowalski said he was thinking maybe 5 to 10% by volume, mixed carefully, tested on one vehicle first. Miller thought about it. He thought about the orders they had, the wounded men waiting at the outpost, the German armor probing the lines. He made a decision. He told Kowalski they would try it on one half-track, his own, and if it worked without blowing the engine, they could consider doing it to the others. But if it failed, Kowalski was going to explain it to the captain. They set to work. Kowalski found a jerry can, poured in about 15 liters of gasoline, then added roughly 1.5 liters of denatured alcohol from a medical kit. The alcohol was ethanol mixed with methanol and other chemicals to make it undrinkable. It was not ideal, but it was what they had. He swirled the can to mix it, checked the smell, and nodded. It smelled sharper than straight gas, more volatile. He poured the mixture into the half-track's fuel tank, filling it about 1/4 of the way. Then he and Miller did something else Kowalski had suggested. They adjusted the tire pressure. The half-track's front tires were inflated to normal road pressure, around 35 psi. Kowalski argued that lowering the pressure to maybe 20 psi would increase the tire's contact patch, giving better flotation in mud. It was a trick he had heard truckers use. Miller agreed. They let some air out of both front tires, watching them flatten slightly. Then Kowalski walked around the vehicle looking at the tracks. He suggested greasing the track pins and sprocket teeth with heavy oil to reduce friction and prevent mud buildup. Miller told him they already did that, but Kowalski insisted on doing it again, more thoroughly. He grabbed a grease gun and went to work. While they prepped the vehicle, other soldiers gathered around, curious. Word spread that the cook was trying something crazy with the fuel. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. A few asked if they could do it to their vehicles too. Miller told them to wait and see if it worked first. Corporal Hayes, who would be riding in the back of the test vehicle, asked what would happen if the engine blew up. Kowalski said it probably would not blow up. It would just stop. Probably. Hayes did not look reassured. Private Jensen, who would be driving, asked if the half-track would actually go faster. Kowalski said it should have more low-end torque, which in mud was more important than top speed. Jensen said he would believe it when he felt it. Miller climbed into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and listened. The engine caught, coughed once, then settled into a rough idle. It sounded different. The note was higher, sharper, with a faint crackle in the exhaust. Miller let it warm up for a minute, watching the temperature gauge. It climbed normally. He revved the engine. It responded faster than usual, surging with a bark that made everyone step back. Miller looked at Kowalski. Kowalski grinned. Miller put the half-track in gear and eased it forward. The vehicle moved smoothly, tracks biting into the mud. He gave it more throttle. The engine roared, the tracks churned, and the half-track accelerated across the clearing faster than it had moved all day. Miller turned it in a circle, testing the steering, then stopped. He climbed out, checked the engine, and found it running hot but not dangerously so. He looked at the tracks. They were cleaner than before, less caked with mud. The lower tire pressure and the extra torque were making a difference. He looked at Kowalski and nodded. He told the platoon leader, Lieutenant Barnes, that they had something that might work. Barnes, a young officer from Ohio who had been in combat for 6 weeks and looked 50, listened to the explanation, frowned, and asked if it was safe. Miller said it was safer than sitting still. Barnes authorized them to mix the fuel for the entire platoon, with the understanding that if anything went wrong, it was on him. Kowalski and Miller spent the next hour preparing fuel for 6 half-tracks, measuring carefully, mixing thoroughly. They adjusted tire pressures, greased tracks, and briefed the drivers on what to expect. The engines would run hotter and louder. Throttle response would be sharper. If anyone smelled smoke or heard knocking, they were to shut down immediately. By early afternoon, the platoon was ready to move. The mission was the same, supply run to the forward outpost, 6 miles through contested terrain. The weather had not improved. Rain still fell in sheets, turning the road into a brown river. The convoy rolled out, 6 half-tracks in a loose column, with Barnes in the lead vehicle. The difference was immediate. The half-tracks moved faster, their engines pulling harder against the mud. The tracks bit deeper, throwing rooster tails of sludge. The front tires, running at lower pressure, floated on top of the mud instead of cutting through it. The convoy made good time, covering the first 3 miles without incident. Then they hit the ambush. The German patrol, the 2 Panzers and the Hanomag, had been waiting near a bridge over a swollen creek. The lead American half-track rounded a bend and came face to face with the 1st Panzer, which was parked hull down behind a ruined farmhouse. The Panzer fired. The shell missed, hitting a tree 20 meters to the left and showering the road with splinters. Barnes yelled for the convoy to scatter. The half-track split, 3 turning left into the trees, 3 turning right. Jensen's vehicle, 4th in line, went right, following Hayes's shouted directions. Behind them, the 2nd Panzer emerged from cover and gave chase. The race began. Jensen floors the throttle. The engine screams, a high-pitched wail that drowns out the rain. The half-track surges forward, tracks flinging mud in great arcs. The road ahead is barely a road anymore, just 2 ruts filled with water and bordered by trees. Jensen aims for the ruts, keeping the wheels in the deepest part where the clay is softest. The tracks grip the firmer ground on the edges. The vehicle shudders, bouncing over hidden roots and rocks, but it keeps moving. Hayes, in the back, leans out and looks behind them. He sees the Panzer, a grey shape half obscured by rain maybe 300 meters back. It is moving steadily, its wider tracks giving it stability, but it is not gaining fast. Hayes shouts to Jensen that they have a chance. Jensen does not answer. He is focused on the road, on the feel of the steering wheel, on the sound of the engine. The modified fuel is working. The engine is pulling hard, responding instantly to his throttle inputs, but it is also running hot. He can smell the heat, a metallic tang mixed with burning oil. The temperature gauge is climbing toward the red zone. Kowalski, riding in the passenger seat, watches the gauges with growing concern. He knows what happens when an engine overheats. Gaskets blow, coolant boils, head bolts warp. If the engine seizes now, they are dead. He tells Jensen to ease off slightly, just enough to let the temperature stabilize. Jensen glances at him, then at the mirror showing the Panzer behind them, and shakes his head. He keeps the throttle down. Kowalski curses and looks out the window, searching for options. He sees a side trail branching off to the right, barely visible through the trees. He points and yells at Jensen to take it. Jensen hesitates. The trail could be a dead end, it could be mined. But staying on the main road means the Panzer will eventually get a clear shot. Jensen cranks the wheel right. The half-track lurches onto the trail, and they plunge into deeper woods. The trail is worse than the road. It is narrower, muddier, choked with fallen branches. The half-track crashes through, snapping saplings, scraping against tree trunks. The low tire pressure helps. The tires compress and flex, absorbing impacts that would normally puncture them. The tracks claw at the ground, finding purchase on roots and stones. The modified fuel keeps the engine pulling, even as the load increases. Behind them, the Panzer hesitates at the junction. The commander has to decide whether to follow or continue on the main road. He chooses to follow. The Panzer turns onto the trail, its bulk making the turn awkward. It accelerates, engine bellowing, but the narrow trail slows it down. The trees are too close. The Panzer has to move carefully to avoid getting wedged. Jensen gains distance. Hayes, still watching the rear, sees the Panzer falling back. He grins and slaps the side of the half-track. He shouts that it is working, they are pulling away. Jensen allows himself a brief smile, but the smile fades when he sees what is ahead. The trail descends into a hollow where a stream has overflowed, creating a pond of standing water maybe 50 meters across. There is no way around. The trees are too thick, they have to go through. Jensen does not slow down. He aims for the center, where the water looks shallowest, and hits it at full speed. The half-track smashes into the water with a huge splash, sending waves in all directions. The engine sputters, chokes, and for a terrible moment, Jensen thinks it is going to stall. But it catches again, coughing smoke, and keeps running. The tracks churn through the submerged mud. The front wheels lift and fall, and the vehicle wallows like a boat. Water pours over the hood, soaking the engine. Steam rises in clouds. The electrical system flickers, but the half-track does not stop. It claws its way through, emerging on the far side, dripping and smoking. The Panzer reaches the water's edge and stops. The commander looks at the flooded hollow, calculates the risk, and decides not to take it. A Panzer can ford water, but not when the bottom is uncertain. If the tank sinks or gets stuck, it becomes a stationary target. The commander reverses, turns around, and withdraws. Hayes sees it happening and lets out a whoop. They have done it. They have outrun a Panzer. Jensen keeps driving, not trusting the reprieve, until they are another mile down the trail and the engine temperature has dropped back to safe levels. Then he stops, kills the engine, and sits back, hands shaking. Kowalski climbs out and checks the engine. It is a mess. The air filter is soaked. The spark plugs are fouled. The fuel lines are hot to the touch, but nothing is broken. The improvised mix has worked, at least this once. Over the next week, word of Kowalski's fuel mix spreads through the regiment. Other units hear about it and want to try it. Some mechanics are skeptical. Some are intrigued. Lieutenant Barnes writes a field report describing the incident, noting that the modified fuel and reduced tire pressure contributed to the half-track's ability to evade enemy armor. The report goes up the chain of command and disappears into the bureaucracy of war. No official endorsement comes back. No prohibition either. In the absence of clear orders, individual units make their own decisions. Some adopt Kowalski's method, some refine it, experimenting with different ratios and additives. Some reject it as too risky. The results vary. Some vehicles perform better, some break down. A few catch fire. In one incident, a half-track engine detonates spectacularly during a resupply run, though no one is hurt. The consensus among mechanics is that the mix works under specific conditions, but it is not a miracle. It is a trade-off. You gain torque and throttle response, but you accept higher engine temperatures, increased wear, and the risk of catastrophic failure. Whether the trade is worth it depends on the situation. The tactical implications are more complex. Mobility in mud is not just about power. It is about weight distribution, track design, ground pressure, and driver skill. The half-track's advantage over the Panzer in that chase was not purely the fuel. The M3 weighed less, had better front-wheel steering, and could reverse quickly. The lower tire pressure helped, giving more flotation. The driver, Jensen, was experienced and made good decisions under pressure. The Panzer commander, cautious about the flooded hollow, chose not to risk his vehicle. All these factors mattered, but the fuel mix gave Jensen the extra margin he needed. It let him accelerate out of trouble, maintain speed through the worst mud, and keep the engine running when it should have stalled. That margin, small as it was, made the difference between escape and capture. Kowalski becomes something of a legend in the platoon. Soldiers start calling him the fuel wizard. He tries to downplay it, insisting that he just applied basic chemistry and got lucky. But the nickname sticks. Requests come in from other units asking for his help. Kowalski, still officially a cook, finds himself spending more time around engines than stoves. He teaches other soldiers how to mix the fuel, how to measure proportions, how to recognize warning signs. He stresses the dangers. He tells them that this is not a standard procedure, that it can damage engines, that they should only use it when absolutely necessary. Some listen, some do not. Kowalski watches as his improvisation spreads, mutates, and takes on a life of its own. He hears rumors of units using pure alcohol, of engines exploding, of vehicles abandoned because the fuel ruined the carburetors. He worries that he has unleashed something he cannot control. Miller, the mechanic, has mixed feelings. On one hand, the fuel mix has saved lives. On the other hand, it has created new problems. Engines that run on the modified fuel need more maintenance. Spark plugs foul faster. Valves carbon up. Fuel pumps wear out. Miller and his team spend long hours rebuilding engines, replacing parts, cleaning components. The workload increases, but so does the unit's operational tempo. The half-tracks can go places they could not go before. They can escape situations that would have trapped them. The trade-off, Miller decides, is acceptable, but he makes sure every driver knows the risks. He institutes a rule. If you use the mix, you check your engine every hour. You watch the gauges. You listen for knocking. And if anything sounds wrong, you shut down immediately. Lieutenant Barnes, now a captain, after his predecessor is killed in an artillery barrage, writes a second report. This one is more detailed. He describes the fuel composition, the preparation method, the observed effects and the risks. He includes data from multiple engagements, comparing mobility in standard and modified configurations. He concludes that the practice has tactical value, but should be used selectively, with proper supervision and maintenance support. The report reaches division headquarters. A staff officer reads it, makes a note, and files it. No official guidance is issued. The practice remains unofficial, neither endorsed nor forbidden. It exists in the grey zone of field expedience, tolerated as long as it does not cause major problems. By December, the focus shifts. The weather worsens. Snow replaces rain. The mud freezes, then thaws, then freezes again, creating a landscape of ice and slush. The fuel mix loses some of its effectiveness in the cold. Alcohol-blended fuels can cause starting problems when temperatures drop below freezing. Kowalski and Miller adapt, reducing the alcohol content and adding more kerosene for cold start lubrication. The adjustments work, but the gains are smaller. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Bulge erupts to the south. The entire front erupts into chaos. The regiment is pulled from its sector and sent to reinforce the collapsing line. The half-tracks, with their modified fuel and worn-out engines, are thrown into a desperate defense. Some break down. Some are destroyed. Some, like Jensen's, keep running through sheer luck and relentless maintenance. Jensen, promoted to sergeant, commands his own half-track now. He still uses the modified fuel, but sparingly, only when he needs the extra edge. He has learned to read his engine, to know when he can push it and when he needs to back off. He has survived 4 months of combat, an eternity in this war, and he credits Kowalski's mix with saving his life at least twice. When someone asks him if the fuel really made the half-tracks twice as fast, he laughs and says no, not even close. But it made them fast enough, in the moments that mattered. That is all anyone can ask. Kowalski, still technically a cook, ends the war with a Bronze Star for Valor, awarded for his actions during a fuel run under fire. The citation does not mention his improvised fuel mix. It mentions his courage, his initiative, and his dedication to his comrades. Kowalski frames the medal and keeps it in a drawer. He never talks much about the war. When people ask, he says he did what needed doing, same as everyone else. He goes back to Detroit, works in an auto plant, and lives a quiet life. But sometimes when he smells gasoline mixed with something sharp and volatile, he remembers the rain, the mud, the half-tracks churning through the forest, and the panzer falling behind. He remembers the fear, the exhilaration, and the knowledge that he had found a way to give his friends a fighting chance. Miller survives the war too. He stays in the army, becomes a master sergeant, and serves in Korea and Vietnam. He teaches mechanics the lessons he learned in the Hurtgen mud, that improvisation is necessary, that risks must be calculated, and that there is no such thing as a free lunch. When he retires, he writes a memoir that includes a chapter on the fuel experiments. He is careful to present them as field expedients born of desperation, not as recommended practice. He emphasizes the dangers, the failures, the soldiers who died because engines gave out at the wrong time. He does not romanticize the war. He does not claim that the fuel mix won battles, but he acknowledges that it made a difference in small ways in critical moments. He dedicates the chapter to Kowalski, the cook who dared to think like a mechanic. The story of the improvised fuel mix becomes one of those war tales that blurs the line between fact and legend. In some versions, the half-tracks really do run twice as fast. In others, the fuel is described as a magical potion. The truth, as always, is more complicated. The fuel mix, combined with reduced tire pressure, better weight distribution and skilled driving, improved the M3's performance in mud by perhaps 10 to 20%. That improvement, marginal on paper, was significant in practice. It let vehicles maintain momentum when they would otherwise bog down. It let drivers accelerate out of ambushes. It gave commanders more options, but it came at a cost. Engines wore out faster. Maintenance hours increased. Some vehicles were lost to mechanical failures that would not have occurred with standard fuel. The calculus was brutal. Trade long-term reliability for short-term performance, and hope you survive long enough for the trade to matter. Modern analysts, looking back, debate the merits. Some argue that the practice was reckless, that it endangered soldiers and equipment. Others point out that in the context of the Outrun and Bulge, where survival was measured in hours, the trade-off made sense. The debate is academic. The soldiers who were there made their choices based on the information they had and the threats they faced. They did not have the luxury of hindsight or controlled experiments. They had mud, rain, enemy armor, and a desperate need to keep moving. Kowalski's mix, flawed and risky as it was, gave them a tool. Whether it was the right tool is a question for historians. For the soldiers, it was the tool they had. The physical evidence is scarce. Few of the modified half-tracks survived the war. Those that did were rebuilt, their engines replaced, their service records incomplete. There are no photographs of Kowalski mixing fuel, no film footage of the chase through the forest. The written records are fragmentary. A field report here, a maintenance log there, a few mentions in unit histories. The story persists because the survivors remembered it, talked about it and passed it on. In veterans' reunions, in interviews, in letters to historians, the tale resurfaces. A cook who knew engines, a fuel mix that should not have worked, a half-track outrunning a Panzer in the mud. The details vary, the core remains. What can be verified is this. The M3 half-track, powered by the white 160AX gasoline engine, was used extensively in the European theatre from 1944 to 1945. It performed adequately in most conditions, but struggled in the heavy mud of the Outrun forest and surrounding areas. Soldiers and mechanics improvised solutions to improve performance, including modifications to fuel, tire pressure, and track maintenance. Some of these improvisations were successful, some were not. The overall impact on the war was minimal, but the impact on individual units and soldiers was real. The story of Kowalski's fuel mix is emblematic of a larger truth about war. That survival often depends on ingenuity, risk-taking, and the willingness to try solutions that seem absurd until they work. The half-track that Jensen drove, the one that escaped the Panzer, was destroyed in January 1945 during a German counterattack near the Roer River. Jensen was not in it at the time. He had been reassigned to another vehicle after his was damaged in a mine strike. The half-track, patched and repaired, was being driven by a replacement crew when an 88mm shell hit it broadside. The crew survived, bailing out seconds before the fuel tank exploded. The wreckage was later stripped for parts and abandoned. Jensen heard about it weeks later and felt a strange sadness. That vehicle had saved his life. It had carried him through hell, and now it was gone, reduced to scrap in a frozen field. He did not dwell on it. There was no time. The war rolled on. By April 1945, the regiment reaches the Elbe River. The war in Europe is ending. The mud dries up. The half-tracks, battered and worn, are parked in a field near a captured German airbase. Kowalski, back to cooking full-time now that the fighting has slowed, walks among them, looking at the vehicles he helped keep running. He sees engines held together with wire and improvisation, tracks worn to the rivets, bodies pocked with bullet holes and shrapnel. He sees the cost of 6 months in combat. He wonders if his fuel mix made things better or worse. He decides it does not matter. It is over. He survived. His friends survived. That is enough. Miller, standing beside him, asks what he is thinking. Kowalski shrugs and says he is thinking about how crazy it all was. Miller laughs and agrees. They stand there for a while, two soldiers in a field of broken machines, and do not say much else. There is not much to say. The war has taught them that some things cannot be explained, only endured, that improvisation is survival, that desperation breeds innovation, and that the line between genius and recklessness is thinner than anyone wants to admit. In the decades that follow, the story of the fuel mix appears in books, articles, and documentaries, often distorted, sometimes exaggerated, occasionally dismissed as myth. Historians argue about the details. Veterans insist it happened. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. The fuel mix was real. The performance gain was real. The risks were real. The impact was real, but localized, specific to a few units in a few battles. It did not change the course of the war, but it changed the course of some lives, including Jensen's and Hayes's, and that matters. The lesson, if there is one, is not about fuel chemistry or engine tuning. It is about the human capacity to adapt under pressure, to find solutions in impossible situations, to take calculated risks when the alternative is certain failure. Kowalski was not a hero in the Hollywood sense. He was a cook who knew engines and saw a problem he thought he could solve. Miller was a mechanic who weighed the risks and said yes. Jensen was a driver who trusted his vehicle and pushed it to the limit. Hayes was a soldier who watched his back and called out the dangers. Together, in a muddy forest in November 1944, they did something that should not have worked. But it did, and they lived to tell about it. The half-tracks that used the modified fuel performed better in mud, but the improvement was not miraculous. It was incremental, situational, and expensive in terms of wear and risk. The idea that they ran twice as fast is exaggeration, born from the adrenaline of the moment and the mythology of survival. But in the specific conditions of that chase, with that driver and that fuel mix and that Panzer commander's caution, the half-track did pull away. It did escape, and the soldiers inside lived to fight another day. That is the real story. Not a miracle, not a secret weapon. Just soldiers doing what soldiers do, improvising, adapting, and surviving. So if this deep dive into mud, engines, and desperate ingenuity has kept you hooked, make sure you're subscribed, because there are hundreds of these buried stories waiting to be told, and every like and share helps us uncover more. History is not just big battles and famous names. It is moments like this, where a cook's hunch and a mechanic's gamble changed everything for the men in one half-track on one muddy road. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.